Okay, so this week's assignment is going to start addressing how to write your paper, and you're going to write one section of your paper. And the technique you're going to use is called they say, I say, and it's really about supporting your arguments with evidence. So you've got two chapters to read from a book on this technique, and I really encourage you to read those carefully because that will be helpful for you. So just a little reminder, when writing, always remember clear before clever. If you can't follow your own arguments or aren't sure what point you're trying to make, your audience won't be able to either. So your goal here is clarity. Okay, so when you're working with evidence, it's important to remember to write as close to fact as possible. Facts are statements that can be proven with empirical evidence. Beliefs may be kind of unprovable. It doesn't necessarily mean they're true, but it means we don't have evidence to convince the reader. So when you're worried about making valid claims in your writing, a couple of things to consider. So first of all, you want to avoid generalizations. If you are using words like always, all, none, or never, you're probably going to have a problem. As hopefully by now you've learned, there are always exceptions in psychology. So if you make a statement like women have more highly developed skills than men, shy children do not have friends, there are always exceptions. And so I see this a lot in student papers. And so I really want you to be aware and conscientious of this as you're writing. Adding things like on average or often can help address these issues and kind of temper back these generalizations. You want to be specific. So this is one way to avoid generalizations, clarifying kind of the boundaries of the population that it applies to. So a good example of this is the Mozart effect, if you've ever heard of this. So the idea is that people get smarter after listening to classical music. The original study was done with college students who have slightly higher IQ scores 5 minutes later. This has been generalized to babies listening to classical music, will make them smarter years later. Clearly broad overgeneralization because they were not specific in terms of the context and the population. It's also important to remember that all studies have limitations, and it's okay to be critical of the studies, even those that support your argument. You don't have to criticize every single study, but it's okay to say, you know, this study found this evidence in adolescence. However, they didn't study it in childhood. Okay, so something as simple as that can be a limitation. You also should be aware of your own paper's limitations, and that can help you make a more convincing argument. But despite the fact that the studies can be limited, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's invalid. So you can still use a study for its strengths. A limitation doesn't necessarily invalidate it. It's important to not rely solely on the results of just one study. If you have just one study, it's not very strong evidence. So hopefully in the process of outlining and synthesizing your sources, for most of your claims, you have multiple studies that support it. Okay, we talked a little bit about logical fallacies, but it's important that you kind of understand the flaws in reasoning that might prevent you from making mistakes. You want to make sure to avoid using opinions to support claims because this will weaken your argument. You need evidence for everything you present. And you also need to acknowledge counterarguments. So this is going to be a part of your paper. You need to acknowledge the fact that there are other perspectives and respond to them. Okay, so this is just some kind of useful terminology that you can use as a resource as you're writing. So some phrases of how to describe research. So studies have examined the extent to which, discussing a gap in the research. Researchers have yet to determine whether synthesizing the literature, making a claim, challenging others' claims, anticipating and addressing criticism, and telling the reader why they should care. These are the kinds of things that you should be doing in your paper. And so this is some terminology to kind of help you with that. Okay, so you have to acknowledge other people's perspectives, okay? So this comes from the They Say, I Say chapter. This is really about disagreeing with a reason. If you have an argumentative essay, pretending that no one has ever disagreed with you is going to make your readers suspicious. I would encourage you not to end with the opposing argument. So So you want to, but you can make that kind of the last section of your paper, but you want to end with the reasons why it's wrong. So you want to make sure that you are describing the other perspective, provide evidence why it's wrong. And that is really this process of disagreeing with a reason. So even if this acknowledging the other perspective happens towards the end of your paragraph, within the paragraph, don't end with, and here's what other people say. You want to always come back with, here's what I say. Okay, so this is the kind of thing you might use in the counter argument section of your paper. So this might be something like your thesis is, this is so, the counter argument is, but of course, something else can always be true as well. But then so this is your acknowledgement of the other perspective, but then you come back with, but here's why this is wrong. Okay, so you get it out of the way quickly so you don't keep coming back to it. You won't be doing this probably in this paper, but if you were doing a paper that kind of was more contrasting two sides, you might have your thesis and go back and forth. So your thesis might be possession of handgun guns should be controlled, but self-protection is a natural right, but guns in the home can kill more intruders. Well, here's a counter argument for hunters and collectors, it's justified. And so kind of going back and forth. And so again, this is much more likely if you're doing an issue paper, but I wanted you to kind of see what this would look like. Okay, so the strategy that we're using today is called they say, I say. You can't simply assert a position without any facts or context. So what you need to do is enter a conversation with other people's views as kind of a launching pad. And then you need to support your case with evidence. You're going to start by summarizing the other's views in a fair and objective way, and kind of spin it to lay the groundwork for your own arguments. Okay. And so this is kind of the they say side of things, right? You're going to objectively summarize what other people have done. And then subsequently, you're going to set up your own arguments, which is the I say side of things. So you want to make sure that you're making a unique contribution. Your contribution can be disagreeing with a reason that's supported by evidence. So something like if you disagree, you need evidence to support it. This might be something like, well, everyone says that this is bad for children, but here's some evidence that it actually is good for children. Agreeing with a difference. So this is making a novel contribution by adding fresh and unique ideas. Okay, so adding something new. Yes, everyone agrees that this method is a good intervention technique, but we also have to intervene with the parents as well. Okay, so next, it's important to really distinguish between what they say and what you say or what I say. Citations and signal phrases can really make the attribution clear, and there are some examples in the reading. You don't necessarily have to use the specific phrases, but in general, you need to make it clear. You always have to think about your counter arguments, so anticipate and address criticisms and limitations. And you should tell the reader why they should care about the arguments being made. This is particularly important in the conclusion and introduction. Why is this an important issue? Okay. So the purpose of talking about this is to help give you an idea of how you're going to be dealing with the evidence while supporting your thesis. So your assignment for this week, I have this as a try it yourself, but really this is your assignment for this week. You're going to pick a section of your paper from the outline that you turned in last week. Okay, so your section should be 2 to 3 pages long. It shouldn't be your introduction or conclusion. You're going to pick one of the topics or themes that you're planning to write about, and you're going to write it. So if you do this right, this is going to be something that's going to be put right into your final paper. This is not a separate writing assignment. This is just the first section of your paper that you're writing, not your introduction, but the first main body section, okay? So you're going to pick, if your paper is, if we use the example from the synthesizing sources, you decide you want to write the section on friendship stability, and so you're going to make your arguments about friendship stability. Remember, you need to have a clear thesis or argument and use evidence to support it. That is the purpose of this 2 to 3 page section of your paper. If you disagree with an argument, you want to disagree with a reason or agree with a difference, anticipate criticisms and address them, Now, don't actually say, they say, I say, right? Instead, you're going to present the previous evidence and add your spin. You need to make sure to include in-text citations and also include a little mini references page. You can just copy and paste this from your full references page, but I need to see that you are using evidence to support your arguments. If you don't cite anyone, it defeats the purpose of this. The purpose of this is to get you writing using evidence and supporting your arguments. You should also work on making sure your paragraphs have topic and concluding sentences and you have transitions between them. The transition goes in the first sentence, the topic sentence of the new paragraph. And you should make sure to organize your section, right? So go from kind of broad to narrow in the first paragraph, elaborate in the middle, and then narrow to broad in the last. So essentially you are writing a mini paper that is going to actually go into your bigger paper. So again, the purpose of this is not to do anything extra. This is really just the first section that you're diving into in your final paper, but your focus here is on presenting evidence and citing that evidence appropriately, and also making sure that you include your own spin so you have made clear what your argument is and how that evidence supports or doesn't support your argument.